The sky above the village was heavy that evening, swollen with dark clouds that pressed low as if they meant to crush the earth beneath them. The air carried the thick scent of dust and damp leaves, a warning that the storm brewing on the horizon would not be gentle. In the market square, huts stood close together, their thatched roofs shuddering in the wind's rising breath. Chickens huddled under baskets, goats bleated restlessly, and the villagers, though they tried to appear calm, spoke in hushed, sharp tones. It was not only the storm that made them uneasy, something darker, more human, was in the air. Near the old baobab tree where councils were often held, a circle of elders sat with their walking sticks dug into the earth. Their voices carried like a low hum, a buzz of judgment clothed in whispers. They spoke not of rain nor of planting, but of her, the young woman who had become the center of every misfortune they could not explain. A child who fell ill last week, a goat that miscarried its kid, the sudden rot in a field of yams, all of it pointed, they said, to her shadow. Their mouths twisted around the word which, spitting it out as if it burned their tongues, though none could name a spell she had ever cast. Other villagers hovered nearby, pretending to mend baskets to grind maize, but their ears tilted toward the gossip. Faces leaned close, lips trembled with stories that grew sharper each time they were told. It was her stepmother who first whispered it, her eyes narrow, her voice oiled with malice. She walks alone at night. She stares at the sky as though speaking to unseen things. She does not smile at the children. What woman does that? By the time the story reached the edge of the village, it had become something far worse. She curses the sky. She calls the storm. She eats souls in silence. The wind bent the tall grass at the edge of the square. Thunder rolled far off as though the heavens themselves were listening. Yet the council did not stop. An old man's voice cracked like dry wood. We cannot keep her here. If she brings the storm, then let the storm take her. Let the sky itself judge her innocence. Others nodded, some hesitating, some eager, but none speaking against the tide. The young woman herself sat at the doorway of her hut, shoulders hunched, watching the sky with eyes that seemed too deep for her age. She was only 25, but the lines of sorrow carved into her face made her look older, wiser, and strangely untouchable. Her name was spoken less now, replaced by accusations and curses. She was no witch, yet she carried herself with the silence of one condemned, as though she had long ago stopped expecting kindness. Her dress, once bright, hung faded against her body. Her hands, calloused from grinding grain and carrying water, rested still in her lap. She knew the whispers behind her back, she had grown used to them. But this night felt different. Children ran past her, chasing each other, only to stop and glance at her as though daring themselves to look. Mothers pulled them away sharply, muttering that the girl's eyes carried bad luck. Even the dogs avoided her shadow. Still she did not speak. She simply gazed at the storm as if waiting for it to break. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, cold against the earth. They sizzled on cooking fires and sent women scrambling to carry pots indoors. The sky roared again, louder now, closer. It seemed the storm had chosen this night for its fury, and the villagers, restless and afraid, tied that fury to the young woman who sat alone, her silence more dangerous to them than any spell. The council rose to its feet. Decisions had been made in whispers, but their weight fell like stones. They would act before the storm's heart reached them. And in the wind that whipped through the square, carrying dust and fear, the villagers felt a cruel certainty. Tonight the girl would face the sky, chained and helpless, while they watched to see what justice thunder would bring. It had not always been this way. Only a season ago she was nothing more than another pair of hands in the village, quiet, hard-working, almost invisible. But when the rains failed to come as they should, the soil cracked and crops withered beneath the relentless sun. The villagers planted and replanted, prayed and offered sacrifices, yet the ground remained stubborn, swallowing seed and hope alike. Hunger crept into homes, first soft as a whisper, then sharp as a blade. When hunger comes, so does suspicion. Children fell ill with strange fevers, their eyes rolling back, their cries thin and restless through the night. Mothers wailed, fathers clenched their teeth, and the healers shook their heads, powerless. Goats miscarried, chickens died suddenly, and each misfortune added to the weight pressing down on the people. Misfortune demands a face, a name, and her stepmother gave them one. The woman's voice was honeyed when she spoke in public, but behind her sweetness lived a poison long planted. She had never loved the girl left in her care after her father's death. The young woman was a reminder of a first wife she despised, of beauty she could not match, of kindness that made her cruelty more glaring. And so, one evening as the elders sat beneath the massive baobab, its roots twisting like the veins of the earth, she let her poison flow. Her wrapper was neat, her head tied tight, her expression carefully mournful. "My elders," she began, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere, "I fear the storm we face is not of sky and soil alone. It is the work of dark hands." She let her eyes travel slowly, deliberately, until they rested on her stepdaughter. "She walks at night when others sleep. She stares at the sky as if calling things unseen. Have you not felt the weight of her silence? Have you not seen how the chickens avoid her shadow? This is not the way of ordinary women." The murmurs began at once, soft but sharp, like the crackling of dry leaves. An elder cleared his throat. "These are heavy words, woman. Do you bring proof?" The stepmother pressed a hand dramatically against her chest. "Proof is in the suffering of this village. Since she grew, death has walked with us. Since she became a woman, our crops have withered. Since she began her nightly wanderings, storms have threatened us. Tell me, must we wait until the whole village lies in graves before we call her what she is?" The council fell silent for a long moment, the only sound the creaking of the baobab branches above. Then one of the oldest men, whose grandchild had recently wasted away from fever, struck his staff against the earth. "We cannot ignore what is before us. A goat died this morning with no wound, no sickness. The sky darkens too quickly these days. Our people are restless. A witch among us would explain much." More voices joined, layering fear upon fear. Someone recalled how she had refused to eat at a feast, another how she sang softly to herself while fetching water at dusk. Innocent acts twisted into dark omens under the weight of suspicion. It did not matter that no one had seen her speak a spell or mix herbs in secret. The people needed someone to carry their dread, and she was there, silent, distant, already an outsider in their eyes. Her stepmother lowered her gaze, pretending humility as though the idea pained her. But the curve at the corner of her mouth betrayed the satisfaction she could not quite hide. She had planted her lie carefully, and it had taken root. At last the chief elder rose, leaning on his staff, his voice grave as thunder. "We are but men, and our eyes cannot see what spirits do. But the sky sees all. If she is guilty, let the storm claim her. If she is innocent, let the dawn prove it. Tonight she shall be bound to the old tree, and the heavens will decide her fate." The decision rippled through the gathered crowd. Some nodded solemnly, relieved that action was taken. Others shivered, uneasy with the thought of chaining a young woman to face the fury of the storm. But none dared to speak against it, for fear of joining her in suspicion. From the shadows the girl heard their voices. She did not cry out, did not plead. Only her eyes lifted once to the heavy clouds above, as if she already knew the sky had heard the council's verdict before the words were spoken. The night had fallen thick and heavy, the kind of night where the moon hid behind swollen clouds and the air carried the taste of iron and rain. The council's decision had been swift, and now the whole village moved with a strange, feverish energy, torches raised high against the gathering storm. Shadows leapt wildly along the mud walls of huts, and the voices of men and women rose like a chant, low and relentless, as though to drown out their own unease. In the center of it all they dragged her. Two strong men gripped her arms, another pulled at her wrists bound with rough rope, and still another prodded her forward with the butt of a spear. Her bare feet stumbled against the wet earth, toes splitting on stones, but she made no sound except for the quick, tight breath of someone refusing to break. Her eyes stayed fixed on the path ahead, where the ancient tree loomed in the darkness like a giant's twisted hand, its roots jutting out as if reaching to grasp whoever dared approach. The first drops of rain hissed as they struck the torches, sending up thin trails of smoke. Lightning forked in the sky, white veins flashing across the clouds, and the thunder that followed shook the ground beneath their feet. Some villagers muttered that the spirits were already awake, already watching. Yet still they marched on, pulling her through the mud toward the tree that had seen countless generations live and die, but never such a cruel spectacle as this. When they reached it, the wind surged, snatching at garments and rattling the leaves above. A boy ran forward with the chains, long rusted iron links that clattered like teeth when they struck the ground. They had been kept for years, remnants of some forgotten punishment, and tonight they would be given purpose again. The men forced her back against the trunk, the bark rough and wet against her skin. One seized her wrists, twisting them hard behind her as another wound the chain around them, pulling until the iron bit deep. She winced, but the sound of her pain was lost in the crash of thunder overhead. Her ankles were bound next, the links tightened until they cut into flesh, leaving raw marks that oozed blood. Each pull of the chain echoed against the tree as if the earth itself were recording her suffering. When they stepped back, she was bound tight, the cold iron pressing into her bones, the storm beginning to pour itself over her head. Some laughed then, sharp and cruel, their voices high with a kind of false courage. "Let the witch call her spirits now," one shouted over the storm. Another spat at the ground before her. "If she commands the sky, let her ask it to free her." Their mockery spread, nervous laughter rippling through the crowd like fire through dry grass. But not all joined. A few turned their faces away, unable to meet her gaze. Mothers clutched their children close, whispering that they should not watch. A boy, hardly older than 10, hid behind his father's leg, eyes wide with fear not of her, but of what might come. The guilt was there, heavy as the rain that now poured down in sheets, but none dared speak it aloud. To defend her was to invite suspicion, to pity her was to risk sharing her fate. Her hair clung to her face, soaked and heavy, and rivulets of water traced paths down her cheeks. For the first time, her voice broke the silence she had carried so long. It was not a cry to the villagers, nor a plea for mercy. Her words were soft, nearly lost in the storm, but those closest to the tree swore later they heard them. She whispered upward, past the jeering crowd, past the branches that bent beneath the wind, to the swollen, thundering sky. "See me? Judge me? Answer me." The lightning cracked so violently then that for an instant the whole scene froze in stark white. The girl bound in chains, her face lifted in defiance. The villagers with their mouths twisted in scorn or tight with unspoken shame. The ancient tree looming behind her like a witness carved from the bones of the earth. And then the thunder roared again, so loud it drowned their voices, so fierce it rattled the chains around her body. Her cry and the storm's fury fused into one sound, rising over the village until no one could tell where her voice ended and the heavens began. The night thickened until it seemed the whole world had shrunk to darkness, rain, and the ragged breathing of the young woman bound to the tree. The storm had been gathering its rage all evening, but now it released itself without restraint. Lightning tore jagged wounds across the sky, splitting the blackness with violent white light that blinded before vanishing again into shadow. Each strike brought thunder that rolled and cracked like drums of war, shaking the earth until even the bravest villager flinched. Rain lashed down in torrents, drenching her completely. Her dress clung to her body like a second skin, heavy and cold, each drop cutting like needles against her raw flesh. Her hair, plastered across her face, whipped in the wind when she managed to raise her head. The chains that bound her groaned with every movement, their rust grinding into her skin. Each time she shifted, the links tightened cruelly, biting deeper, as if alive and intent on crushing her bones. Blood mingled with the rain, running in thin lines down her arms and legs before disappearing into the mud at her feet. Her body trembled uncontrollably, the chill of the storm sinking into her marrow. Every muscle screamed, every nerve burned from the relentless cold. Yet within the shivering shell of her frame, something stubborn refused to surrender. She sagged forward once, twice, but always lifted her head again, eyes straining toward the sky as if daring it to destroy her. Her lips quivered, not in plea for mercy, but in words only the storm might hear. For a long time, the villagers had stayed hidden in their huts, peering out through cracks in the walls. Some dared to linger closer, huddling under the eaves, their torches extinguished by the rain. They watched her figure in the flashes of lightning, fragile, broken, yet somehow unyielding. Fear prickled their skin. They had wanted her punishment, but what they saw unsettled them. The storm seemed to rage around her, but never upon her fully. Once, a bolt of lightning struck a tree no more than a dozen paces away, shattering it with a deafening crack, splinters scattering like knives through the air. The ground trembled, the smoke rose acrid and sharp, and yet she stood untouched, the chains vibrating wildly but refusing to snap. Another strike split the earth a few feet away, sending a spray of mud over her body. Still the fire did not claim her. Each time, the villagers gasped, certain she would be consumed, and each time she remained, bound but unbroken. Her chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, each breath a struggle against the crushing iron. Despair coursed through her veins, heavy as the rain. Memories of her childhood flickered, her father's gentle hands before he was gone, the laughter she once knew, the warmth she had been denied since. For a moment she wanted only to let go, to sink into the mud and disappear from a world that had offered her nothing but cruelty. Tears mixed with the rain until no one could tell them apart. Yet alongside the despair there burned a coal of fury. How dare they chain her? How dare they decide her worth with lies? How dare they stand safe in their huts while she bore the wrath of sky and storm? The fire inside her did not roar, it smoldered, steady, waiting. The storm had been meant to break her, but with each bolt that failed to touch her, with each gust of wind that shrieked but did not crush her, she felt less like a victim and more like something the night itself had chosen to test. Strange cries carried on the wind. An owl screeched, circling low, its wings slicing through the rain. Another answered from the forest's edge, their calls echoing like omens. Dogs in the village howled, tails tucked, refusing to quiet no matter how their masters scolded. The storm was not only above them, it was inside everything that breathed, rattling bones and stirring instincts long buried. Even the baobab tree to which she was bound groaned, its massive branches thrashing as though trying to shake free from the heavens. Lightning flashed again, this time so close the chains around her wrists glowed faintly, a brief halo of white heat before fading back into darkness. Her breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was still alive, still unburned, and for the first time she felt something more than pain or fear. She felt seen. Not by the villagers, not by her stepmother, not by any human mouth that spat curses at her, but by something vast, something that lived in the storm itself. Her knees buckled, her body hung heavy against the chains, but her eyes blazed in the fleeting light. If she was meant to die here, she thought, then let the sky itself take her. If she was meant to live, then let the storm carve her into something new. The wind howled like a beast, the rain hammered like fists, and the night raged on, restless, as though it too awaited what the dawn would reveal. The storm reached its peak at midnight, a monstrous heartbeat pounding above the village. The sky cracked open again and again, spilling light across the world in violent bursts. Each strike of lightning showed her bound form against the tree, head drooping, body trembling, yet somehow still alive. The rain no longer fell in drops. It poured in sheets, soaking earth and flesh alike, turning the ground into a river of mud. The villagers, huddled in their huts, could not close their eyes against the sound of it. The wind screamed through the eaves, rattling doors and lifting roofs as if invisible hands meant to rip them free. And yet, amid all that fury, she began to drift. Her body had reached the edge of endurance, pain and cold numbing her limbs until she no longer knew where flesh ended and iron began. Her head rolled back against the trunk, chains biting into her skin, and her eyes slipped half shut. The roar of the storm became a strange, steady rhythm, a drumbeat pulling her deeper, away from the tree, away from the night. She saw fire first, an endless plain lit by flames that did not burn. Out of the fire walked figures, tall and shadowed, their eyes like coals, their garments shifting like smoke. She knew them at once though she had never met them, her ancestors stretching back through the bones of time. Their mouths moved as one, voices layered like waves. Child of sorrow. Blood of the forgotten. Do not bend. The vision shifted, and she found herself standing in a vast field of broken women. Some her age, some younger, some ancient, faces lined with grief. They were bound by ropes, pressed down by stones, cast into rivers, burned at stakes. Each bore the marks of cruelty done to them by their own people. They lifted their heads in unison, and their voices cut through the storm like knives. We endured, and so must you. At dawn the truth will rise with you. Her breath caught. The pain in her wrists and ankles vanished for a moment, replaced by the electric thrum of their words vibrating through her bones. She felt no longer alone, no longer weak. She was a vessel carrying not only her own suffering but theirs, a continuation of a story the earth itself had been telling for centuries. The storm answered. Lightning struck so close it blinded her, and for an instant the chains glowed, bright, hot, alive. The villagers watching from their huts gasped. Some swore they saw the metal pulse like veins filled with fire. Others claimed they heard a sound like 1,000 voices speaking at once, carried on the wind. Mothers clutched their children, pulling them away from the cracks in the walls, but still the little ones peered out, wide-eyed, too terrified to look away. She swayed in her trance, head lifting, eyes half open yet glowing faintly in the storm's light. Her lips moved, whispering words none of the villagers could understand. Some insisted she spoke the language of spirits, others that she called on curses. But those closest to her, those who had lingered just beyond the reach of the rain, heard something else entirely. She was speaking to the sky as though to a friend, her words cracked but steady. Not yet. Not broken. See me. Remember me. The owls screamed again from the forest's edge, their cries overlapping with the wind until no one could tell them apart. The dogs in the village whined and pawed at the ground. Even the baobab tree groaned, its massive trunk shuddering as if it too were alive and listening. Inside the huts, the villagers shifted uneasily. What had begun as punishment now looked dangerously close to miracle. If she were truly cursed, would the storm not have consumed her by now? If she were powerless, how could she endure while trees split and huts collapsed? A woman whispered to her husband, "Perhaps we should cut her down." He silenced her with a glare, but his hand trembled where it clutched his staff. The night dragged on, each hour stretching into an eternity. With every lightning strike, the chains glimmered faintly, a dull glow that faded but never disappeared completely. She was no longer just a girl bound to a tree, she had become something else, something caught between earth and sky, mortal and spirit. In her trance she saw her father. His face came to her as it had been in her childhood, gentle eyes, warm smile, his hands resting on her shoulders. He spoke no words, but his presence wrapped around her like a blanket, steadying her against the storm. Behind him, other ancestors gathered, nodding, their forms flickering like flames. She felt their strength pouring into her veins, filling the hollowness left by pain and fear. Her body sagged, nearly lifeless, but her spirit stood tall in that vision. The storm outside her body howled and tore at the world, but inside, a strange calm bloomed. She understood then what the women before her had whispered. Dawn was not merely the rising of the sun, it was revelation. If she endured until the first light, the storm itself would testify. She tilted her face upward, letting the rain wash her eyes clear, and the faintest smile curved her lips. Chains rattled, wind screamed, but the girl who had been condemned as a witch now looked more like a priestess in communion with the sky. And though no one spoke of it later without trembling, many villagers swore that for one brief moment, lightning struck the ground all around her in a perfect circle, yet left her untouched at the center. The storm grew monstrous in the hours after midnight, as if the sky itself had lost patience. The rain no longer fell in sheets, it came down in walls, drumming so hard against the roofs that even the strongest thatch began to tear apart. One by one huts gave way, straw and mud collapsing into the mud below. Men scrambled to hold beams in place, women shielded their children with their bodies, but the storm showed no mercy. The trees bent and cracked in the wind's furious grip. A great acacia near the village edge groaned before splitting clean in half, its crash swallowed by thunder. The baobab to which she was bound thrashed like a living beast, its branches clawing at the night. Each gust of wind screamed through its leaves, the sound like 1,000 voices wailing. And through it all she hung there, trembling, shivering, bloodied but still upright. The chains rattled wildly, not only from the force of the storm but from some strange, unseen energy coursing through them. The iron links quivered as though alive, tightening around her wrists and ankles, biting deeper into raw flesh. She gasped, body arching against the pain, the storm's roar swallowing her cry. The villagers who dared to watch from their shattered huts swore the chains moved of their own accord, slithering like serpents intent on crushing her spirit as much as her body. Then, as the wind reached its fiercest howl, the impossible happened. The chains, which moments before had squeezed so cruelly, suddenly slackened. One link snapped with a metallic shriek, another twisted open as though melted by invisible fire. She sagged forward, no strength left to hold herself upright, and the weight of her body dragged the remaining chains loose. They fell against the tree with a hollow clang, half open, no longer the instruments of her torment. She collapsed to her knees, forehead pressed against the muddy ground. To the villagers watching, it looked as though life had finally left her. Her arms hung limp, her chest did not rise. Rain pelted her body until she seemed more shadow than flesh. A hush fell across the scattered crowd despite the chaos of the storm. Even the laughter and mockery that had marked her punishment were gone now, replaced by unease heavy as stone. Then someone gasped. A faint glow flickered around her body, so soft at first it might have been the trick of lightning, but it lingered even after the sky went dark again. Pale, unearthly light outlined her face, her hands, her frail frame slumped in the mud. It pulsed faintly, like the last breath of a dying ember refusing to fade. "She is not dead," a woman whispered hoarsely from a broken doorway. Another man, clutching his son to his chest, shook his head, his voice trembling. "The spirits are angry. This storm is their judgment." The villagers shifted uneasily, eyes darting between the storm-torn sky and the glowing figure at the tree's base. Some muttered prayers to ward off evil, others fell silent altogether, afraid even to speak. The stepmother, pale and trembling, pressed herself against the wall of her hut, her lips moving soundlessly as though bargaining with whatever power had been unleashed. A sudden gust tore through the village then, ripping entire roofs into the night. The storm roared so violently it seemed to speak in its own tongue, thunder booming like words no human could translate. The ground quaked underfoot. Yet in the midst of all this destruction, the glow around her body brightened once more, brief, defiant, before dimming again. She lay motionless, But the night no longer treated her as a victim. It swirled around her, restless as though waiting for her to rise. And the villagers, huddled in fear, could only whisper the truth none wanted to believe. They had not chained a witch. They had chained a storm, and now the storm was waking. The storm spent itself in the darkest hour before dawn. One moment the wind still screamed like a living thing, tearing at what remained of the village, and the next silence fell. It was not a gentle silence but one that pressed against the ears, thick and unnerving, as though the whole world were holding its breath. The rain thinned to a drizzle, then to nothing, and the black belly of the sky softened. Clouds tore apart slowly, their edges glowing faintly with the first promise of morning. The villagers emerged like shadows from their huts, cautious, broken. Roofs lay scattered across the ground, walls sagged where the storm had bitten too deeply. Goats bleated nervously, chickens scratched in the mud as if the night's violence had never happened. Men and women stepped barefoot into the damp earth, their eyes fixed on the place by the great baobab. They moved slowly as if some invisible weight dragged their feet, as if even the act of looking might summon back the storm. All expected to find a corpse. Some whispered that her body would be twisted and blackened from lightning. Others said the chains would still be tight around her, holding her cold flesh in place. A few believed there would be nothing at all, only ashes scattered by the wind. But when the first thin ray of sunlight broke over the horizon, what they saw froze them where they stood. She was there. Not broken, not lifeless, but standing. Her head was lifted, her back straight against the tree she had been bound to. Her hands hung free at her sides, no longer marked by the grip of chains. The iron links that had cut her skin were scattered at her feet in heaps, no longer whole but shattered. Rust had eaten them in a single night, reducing heavy iron to powder that crumbled at the slightest breath of wind. Her skin glistened with the remnants of rain, but it seemed to shine beyond that, as though the morning itself poured its light through her flesh. The wounds on her wrists and ankles were there, but faint, already closing, healing faster than any human body should. Her hair clung in dark waves to her face and shoulders, yet even in its wildness she seemed crowned by the light of dawn. Most unsettling were her eyes. They were calm, too calm, unearthly calm. The fear and pain of the night were gone, replaced by something the villagers could not name. She looked not like one who had survived a storm but like one who had walked through it and come out changed. Her gaze moved slowly across the crowd, and every man, woman, and child felt it pierce straight through their skin into the marrow of their bones. A murmur rippled through them, soft at first, then rising, confused and frightened. "A goddess," someone whispered, falling to their knees. "A spirit returned to judge us," another said, clutching her child tighter. Others shook their heads, trembling. "No, no, she is cursed, more dangerous now than ever." The stepmother stood among them, her face pale, lips trembling as though words might form but never did. She had wanted the girl destroyed, erased, but here she stood, alive when even the huts had not survived. The woman's hands clutched the edge of her wrapper so tightly her knuckles whitened. She tried to step back, to slip into the safety of the crowd, but the young woman's eyes caught hers and she froze. The girl bent slowly, gracefully, and lifted one of the broken chains in her hand. It disintegrated at her touch, crumbling into red dust that scattered in the breeze. Gasps echoed. She said nothing, but the gesture was enough. It was proof that no human hand had freed her. The sky continued to clear, streaks of pale gold spreading across the horizon. Birds began to call tentatively, testing the stillness. Smoke rose from the damp remains of fires, curling into the morning air. Yet all attention remained on her. Some knelt in reverence, pressing their foreheads to the mud. Others backed away in terror, unable to reconcile what they saw. Children stared wide-eyed, clinging to their mother's skirts. One little girl whispered, "She looks like the sun." No one dared correct her. The silence broke finally when an elder, voice hoarse with disbelief, spoke aloud what everyone thought. "This is no ordinary woman. We chained her to be judged, and she has returned untouched. What are we to call her now? Witch? Or something far greater?" The villagers had no answer. Fear and awe tangled together in their throats, choking them into silence once more. The young woman did not speak either. She stood radiant against the morning light, the storm's fury still clinging faintly to her form. In her calm, in her silence, she was more powerful than any words could make her. And the village, broken by wind and rain, stood smaller before her, unsure whether they had birthed their own salvation or awakened a wrath they could never hope to contain. Some dropped where they stood, the weight of terror and awe buckling their knees. They pressed their foreheads into the wet earth, words tumbling from their lips in half-formed prayers, begging forgiveness for what they had done. Their voices cracked as they pleaded with her not to strike them down, not to summon the storm again. Their cries filled the morning air like a desperate chorus, the sound of human fear laid bare. Others could not bear it. They turned and fled, stumbling over broken fences and fallen branches, sprinting into the forest as if the sight of her would burn them alive. Mothers yanked their children by the hand, fathers abandoned their tools in the mud. Their footsteps faded into the distance, but the look on their faces, wild-eyed, pale, stricken, lingered like a scar over those who remained. At the edge of the crowd, the stepmother sagged to her knees. The strength drained from her as though the storm had returned to claim her alone. Her lips trembled soundlessly, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that only comes when a person realizes their lies have woken something beyond their control. Her hands shook as she tried to lift them in a plea, but no words came. Her throat locked, her voice silenced by the weight of her guilt. She could only stare, trembling, as the young woman's calm gaze rested on her. The elders gathered in a tight knot near the tree, their voices rising in tense whispers, then in sharp, clashing arguments. One, his beard still dripping rain, declared, "She is no witch. We tried to condemn her, yet she stands untouched. The spirits have chosen her. She must be honored or we will bring ruin upon ourselves." Another, eyes darting nervously to the broken chains at her feet, spat in defiance. "No. You see what she has become. This is not mercy, it is danger. If we honor her, we invite her curse upon us all. She must be banished before her power consumes the village." Their words struck like stones against water, sending ripples of panic through the people. Some nodded quickly, fear gleaming in their eyes. Yes, send her away. She is too dangerous." Others shook their heads, voices trembling with awe. "No. Did you not see? The chains dissolved before her. That is not a curse, it is blessing. The spirits spared her. To turn her away now would be to defy the gods themselves." The argument grew louder, sharper, splitting the village down its center. Fear twisted into anger, awe into defiance. One elder lifted his staff and struck it into the mud, silencing them for a breath. "The question is not what she is," he said, his voice hard. "The question is what she will do with the power that now surrounds her." Every face turned back to her. She had not moved. She stood silent, radiant in the morning light, chains reduced to dust around her feet. The villagers' words, their fears, their pleas, all of it washed over her, but she gave no sign of hearing them. That stillness was more frightening than thunder, more commanding than the elders' staffs. Her silence forced them to see themselves. Some wept openly, struck with shame at their cruelty. Others turned their faces away, unable to meet her eyes. And still, the stepmother crouched low, trembling, a husk of the woman who had once spoken with such venom beneath the baobab tree. The village teetered between reverence and terror, not knowing whether they had witnessed the birth of a saint or the rising of a curse. In the hollow of that uncertainty, dawn stretched further across the land, lighting their fear, their awe, and the young woman who had survived both storm and chains. Her lips parted at last, and when her voice came, it was not the trembling sound of the girl they had mocked, nor the pleading tone they had once silenced with chains. It rolled across the clearing like thunder, low and commanding, carrying a weight that made even the elders stiffen where they stood. Every syllable vibrated in the villagers' chests, as if the sky itself had chosen her tongue as its instrument. "You thought me weak," she said, her eyes sweeping the faces before her. "You thought me a curse to bury, a burden to cast into the storm. But I am no longer the girl you mocked. That girl died beneath the chains you wrapped around her. What stands before you now is something greater." Her words cut sharper than a blade, yet they were not spoken in anger. They carried a strange, solemn certainty, as though she were not speaking for herself alone but for something vast and unseen that filled her bones. The villagers shrank back, murmurs rustling through the crowd like dry leaves in the wind. Above them wings stirred. Birds began to gather in the branches of the great tree, small sparrows, dark crows, even a hawk that rarely flew so near to the village. They perched silently, eyes glinting in the dawn light, as if called by her voice. Not one fluttered or sang. They simply watched, still and reverent, like witnesses at a sacred trial. Gasps rippled among the people. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, eyes wide with fear. The elders exchanged glances heavy with meaning. This was no ordinary sign. The air thickened with a strange stillness, a silence so deep that even the usual buzzing of insects seemed to have fled. And then, far on the horizon, the clouds began to stir again. A low rumble rolled across the land, distant yet unmistakable. Another storm was forming, not of their choosing, not of chance. The villagers could feel it. It pulsed with her breath, answered the emotions rising in her chest. The wind tugged at her dress as though eager to serve her, swirling dust and broken leaves around her feet. She lifted her gaze to the darkening edge of the sky. For a heartbeat, her expression softened, almost mournful, as if she grieved the innocence that had been torn from her. But when her eyes returned to the villagers, they blazed with unearthly calm. "You chained a woman," she said, her voice steady as the earth itself. "But in your cruelty you woke something you cannot chain. Something that listens to the sky and commands the storm." The words settled over them like a sentence pronounced. No one dared move. No one dared speak. The birds above shifted slightly, wings rustling as though in agreement. The stepmother, still on her knees, let out a strangled whimper. Her body shook with the weight of what she had unleashed, but her voice failed her again. The young woman's gaze brushed over her, unhurried, neither condemning nor forgiving, merely seeing. That look alone made the stepmother bow her head lower, unable to meet it. The villagers understood then. She was no longer theirs to curse, no longer a scapegoat to bind. She was something they could not name, a bridge between flesh and spirit, between earth and sky. The storm that brewed on the horizon was not just weather. It was her heartbeat echoing across the land. And in that moment, as the chain's dust swirled at her feet, they realized the truth too late. They had not destroyed her. They had remade her into something divine. The silence after her last words stretched like a taut rope, and all eyes clung to her as though their lives depended on her next breath. The storm at the horizon thickened, growling low, its voice an echo of hers. She stepped forward, the ground seeming to respond beneath her feet, and the villagers parted without thinking, trembling at her nearness. Her gaze swept over them until it landed on one figure, the stepmother, still kneeling, shuddering like a leaf in the wind. "You," she said, her voice cutting through the dawn air like a spear. The stepmother flinched, shoulders hunched, eyes darting as though she might vanish into the earth. But there was nowhere to run. "You planted lies," the young woman declared, her voice deepening with the storm's rumble. "You poisoned hearts, turned blood against blood. And now you shall reap what you have sown." The stepmother's lips parted in a gasp, but no sound came. She clutched her throat, her fingers trembling against her neck, trying to force words from her tongue. But nothing emerged. Her voice had been stolen, cut away like a severed root. Her eyes widened with terror, and she began to wail silently, her mouth shaping cries the wind refused to carry. The villagers recoiled, whispers breaking out like sparks in dry grass. The young woman turned from her, unshaken, her expression carved from something stronger than flesh. Her gaze rose to the elders, who stood stiffly under the tree, their staffs in hand, their eyes darting like trapped animals. "You weighed me unjustly," she said, her words echoing as if the tree itself repeated them. "You listened not to truth but to fear. You struck no balance. You let envy and suspicion blind your wisdom. The sky has judged you." The elders staggered as a sudden gust whipped around them, their cloaks snapping like sails. Their faces drained of color, and one of them fell to his knees, clutching his chest as though unseen hands pressed down on it. They were not struck dead. Instead, something deeper coiled inside them, a knowing, a curse invisible yet sharp as steel. They felt it settle in their bones. From that day forward, every time thunder cracked or the wind howled through the trees, terror would seize them. Fear would be their constant companion, a reminder of their injustice. The villagers stared in awe and dread. She had not spilled blood, yet her justice cut sharper than any spear. She had not burned their homes, yet her sentence would linger with every storm, with every cloud that gathered in the sky. Vengeance, tempered not with mercy but with balance. An order restored between cruelty and consequence. She lifted her chin, her eyes glowing faintly with the last remnants of stormlight. "Let the sky be your witness," she said. "I will not kill you. Your own hearts will be your tormentors, your own memories your punishment. When the rains fall and the lightning burns the horizon, you will remember what you did. And you will know that the sky does not forget." The air stilled again. The birds that had been watching took flight all at once, a dark cloud scattering across the morning. The sound of their wings was like a final seal pressed upon her words. No one spoke. No one dared. The villagers bowed their heads, some in shame, others in terror. And the young woman stood at the foot of the broken chains, neither smiling nor weeping, but holding herself with the unshakable weight of one who had walked through death and returned with power. Justice had been delivered, not in blood, but in fear, silence, and memory. The years slipped away, yet the night of chains and thunder never left the village. Children were born, crops rose and fell, graves were dug and new songs were sung. But when darkness deepened and clouds gathered over the horizon, silence always spread through the huts. For even as the people grew older and the faces of those who had wronged her faded into the earth, the memory of the woman at the tree remained. By firelight the elders kept her story alive. Children would gather close, their wide eyes glimmering with the reflection of flames, listening as voices cracked with age and fear. Once, the elders would begin, there was a storm like no other. Once the sky judged us through her. They spoke of the girl, misunderstood, accused, bound to a tree while rain poured like the wrath of the heavens. They spoke of the chains, of her cries swallowed by thunder, of the dawn that revealed not death, but transformation. And the children would shiver, clutching their knees, glancing toward the dark windows as if expecting to see her shadow pass by. The tree still stood at the village's edge, its bark scarred where rust had eaten into it, the soil beneath it still darkened as though the storm had never left. No one cut it down, no axe dared touch it, for the tree had become more than wood and roots. It was a boundary between the living and the unseen. Women laid calabashes of milk at its base when storms threatened. Men bowed their heads when they passed, and travelers were warned never to rest beneath its branches. It was not a tree, it was a sentinel. And when the sky cracked with lightning and the rains fell heavy, whispers filled the huts. She walks again. Some swore they saw her figure moving between sheets of rain, her outline glowing faintly, her eyes two burning embers in the storm. Others claimed they heard her voice, sometimes a cry, sometimes a hymn, woven into the howling wind. Children would press their faces to their mothers' laps, trembling as the elders' warnings rang louder than the thunder. Never chain a soul unjustly, for the sky remembers what men forget. The stepmother had died voiceless, her silence passed down as a warning. The elders who once condemned her had long since withered, their bones dust beneath the earth, but even now their descendants lowered their eyes whenever storms rolled in, as though the curse lingered through bloodlines. And still the tale traveled, spreading from this village to the next, becoming not just a story but a legend, half warning, half prayer. On nights when the storm raged hardest, when lightning licked the horizon and rain fell in sheets so thick the world blurred, people claimed to see more than her. They said spirits gathered at the tree, women with bound hands, men with hollow eyes, children clinging to mothers. All the forgotten, all the unjustly silenced, standing with her in the rain, a procession of shadows guarding her memory. Yet the most haunting sight belonged to the tree itself. Lightning would strike it again and again, each bolt a spear of white fire splitting the dark. The children would scream, expecting the ancient trunk to burst into flames. But it never did. Not once. The bark smoked, the branches shook, but the fire slid off as though the tree carried a covenant older than wood, older than the village itself. The people watched, their hearts heavy with fear and awe, as the storm lit the sacred place, reminding them of the night the sky chose her. And when silence followed, when the rain softened and the clouds drifted away, the tree remained, unburned, unbroken, eternal. Just like the story. For legends do not die. They live in whispers, in firelight, in the tremble of a child's breath when thunder rattles the hut. They live in the fear of the guilty and the reverence of the innocent. And so her story endured, the girl who was chained, the storm that judged, the dawn that revealed the divine. Even now, when the lightning dances across the night sky, the villagers lift their eyes and murmur her name, not as a curse but as a warning and as a prayer.